On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. All right, so I was 50-50 on that this morning. And so that's an old hymn we used to sing in church. Johnny Cash actually recorded it. So I wore all black in honor of him today. And when I was in the foyer, Rusty LaBarge said, "You're dressed like Johnny Cash today." I saw it as a sign, so here we go. It's his fault. So how many of y'all know that song? Ever heard that one? All right, we got some hands in the room. Okay. Way better than first service. Yeah, so I'm bound for the promised land. We're going to be talking a little bit about the crossing of the Jordan today. But I can remember a time in my Marine Corps days when I really did think on a particular day that I was bound for the promised land. We were doing some topographical training, and as the exercise we were doing had us assaulting a mountain, and we had to be extracted from the top of it. And so we were going to be extracted through this mechanism called spy rigging. And that stands for Special Patrol Insertion and Extraction. It looks like this. So yeah, we signed up for that. We were like, hey, blank check on my life. Just sign me up. Let's hook me to a rope and take off in a helicopter, right? Because you see, helicopters can't always land on the tops of mountains. And so we must be extracted other ways, that way. And so needless to say, I had some anxiety about that day. The morning started off with a brief on what the day's objective was to be. The stick boss, that's the fellow that tells everybody what to do in the helicopter. The stick boss of the helicopter that it was going to be extracting us gave us a brief, and he said something to the tune of, all right, these are Vietnam-era CH-46 helicopters. They're known to have some trouble. Which, if I got any guys in the room that's ever been in a CH-46 helicopter, I have been in them where there was actual hydraulic fluid leaking on the bulkhead, to which I raised an alarm like, hey, and they were like, that's good, that means there is some, right? And he said, so these are known to have trouble, and if while you are under carriage, we're having trouble, what we're going to try to do is we're going to drag you through the trees and before we cut the line to maximize your chance at survival, which I was grateful. He said, if we're over water, we'll do the same thing. And then his last words were, well, truthfully, if it's your day to get jacked, you'll get jacked. And I remember thinking, well, that's probably the most honest thing I've ever heard during my service. But scarier than that, I knew the exercise was going to end with me fashioning a harness out of a piece of rope we were carrying in our existence load in our packs. And by this point, we have practiced making this harness under the watchful eye of instructors, but we really didn't know if it was going to hold. So this is what it was like, a long piece of rope, and we learned how to do the thing and then tie it and then do the carabiner, and then they would come by and go, yep, you're good, you need to fix that, whatever, But we didn't know it was going to hold until we hook in and lift off. And by the way, there's no OSHA in the Marine Corps, right? You don't do a good job on your harness, well, we'll see what happens. So I could have believed that the harness would work for all of eternity, but I wouldn't have seen that it worked until I hooked in. The hour was at hand. So I had to believe that the harness would work before I saw that the harness would work. And if I didn't believe, then I wouldn't hook in. And if I didn't hook in, I'd be left behind to wander. So I want to show you the result of my faith. All right, here it is. So, this is 32 years ago. So before selfies were a thing, kids, we had these things called disposable cameras that we weren't supposed to take up there with us, right? And so I had it in my magazine pouch, and when we got off the ground and nobody could see, I pulled it out. And so, by the way, we're moving there. I mean, I look like a dork, right? But like I'm doing this. Okay? Before selfies were a thing, that's what happened. Praise be to God, my harness worked and I'm still here, right? All right. So as I've said multiple times, the only spiritual gift of which I'm clearly aware that I have is the ability to see God's robust, well-rounded, lifelong curriculum in real time by noticing spiritual lessons in all situations. And this is what came to me in that situation. The faith I had in my harness is no different than the faith I should have in the Almighty. My belief in the harness prompted me to act, and I was able to see the fruit. And my belief in the power of the Almighty does the same. I could say it like this. I may say seeing is believing, but God says, believe me, and you will see. And so for those of us who choose to follow God, we can be assured that multiple times in our journey that He's going to bring us to moments where the things He promises will not be seen unless we take action. And we have a real world example of that right here in this church, right now. The staff and elders are currently facing this right now as we prepare to move to our new building on Cherry Street, hopefully this September. God has led us to this point, and it's scary. But we know we can trust Him because He was with Real Life Ministries Texas when it started in a backyard. He was with Real Life Ministries Texas when it began, and the senior pastor was out because his daughters were in a car wreck. It continued to grow while COVID wreaked havoc all over this country and the world. And because of your faithfulness and your obedience, God has dragged us to another Jordan crossing moment as we prepare to move. So do you trust God in this? Don't you want to see what happens? You may say seeing is believing, but God says, believe me, and you will see. So maybe in your personal life, you are at your own Jordan crossing moment. You have heard the call. You have consecrated yourself. You know God is ready for you to move, and the next step is to dip your souls in the river. But you fear the giants or the unknown strongholds awaiting you on the other side, and you feel the tempting tug of the comfort of the wilderness. If only God would let you see what might happen first, right? It doesn't work that way, does it? The harness of God's sovereignty might work, but you got to hook onto the rope hanging from heaven to find out. Otherwise, you'll get left behind and be left to wander. In the case of your Jordan crossing moment, you know if God will lead you to it, God will lead you through it. Won't He? Wouldn't you like to know? Many say, seeing is believing, but God says, believe me and you will see. Are you ready to transform your faith to sight? So we are currently in a series that we are calling First, where we are exploring the idea of putting the message of the King and the kingdom first in our lives. And it is also the title of the generosity initiative that we're having in transitioning to our move over there. And so if you want further information of that, I think we have a slide up here. If you were unable to attend any of our meetings, or if you're new here and you want to know what this whole First thing is all about and the transition from here over to there, there's all kinds of videos that'll catch you up of the meetings that we had. And it has some frequently asked questions and things that might help you along in the information journey of that. But I encourage you to take a snapshot of that or do the QR thing, and it'll take you right to the website for you to see that we have a landing page that gives you all that information. But we're doing a sermon series just kind of to go along with that campaign. So 2 weeks ago, Brandon preached on calling, where we looked at the call that God has for all of us who are obedient, as He did to Joshua. Okay? Because He calls His people to lead from time to time. Last week, we looked at consecration, where the people of Israel had to separate the devoted things that kept them from following God, and we are called to do the same. We are called to consecrate ourselves. And today we'll be looking at a story of the Jordan crossing in the book of Joshua, where the Israelites get an opportunity to see the promises of God come to fruition because they put their faith in action without knowing the outcome. Their faith became sight. And this story is rich in lessons for all of us. So before we read today's passage, I want to refresh you on what got us to where this story picks up. So if you remember from Numbers chapter 13 and 14, the Israelites were at this point of crossing 40 years prior. And the Lord did miraculous things to bring them out of Egypt. And He parted the Red Sea, and He led them through the desert, and now he was about to give them the land he promised Abraham generations before. And they chose and sent in 12 spies, each representing one of the tribes of Israel. And when the spies returned, Caleb and Joshua, two of the spies, said, there are giants in the fortified cities in the promised land, but God will be with them. The other 10 spies said that they can't win because they're grasshoppers compared to the giants, and that caused a ton of disunity among the people. And the people grumble against God, and they grumble against the leaders. And they say that they would like a new leader so they can go back to Egypt and be enslaved again. They would rather be enslaved than cross. So God gets angry with them, and because of their lack of faith, they don't get to see the promise. God has them set out back to the wilderness to wander for 40 years to kill off the generation that did not have enough faith to enter. Just consider that for a minute. Does God particularly like it when we don't have faith in him and don't act? So I've assigned a name to this group based on the number of times the Hebrew word for set out, which is nasa, is used in the book of Numbers, where they were set out more than 50 times. I will call them the transients. We can learn from them that when we don't act on our faith, we too will be set out to wander. Like them, we will just have to go from place to place, moving from the left and to the right. We will be transient. We don't get to see his promises if we don't demonstrate our faith in him with evidence of our actions. Instead, we get more time in the wilderness. If we don't hook in, we get left behind. So this is what one's faith may look like if they are a transient. So I've got this on the screen. So these transients, those that are set out because they didn't act on their faith, you might be a transient if you forget what God has done for you in the past. So transients forget what God has done for them in the past. So they come across another crossing moment and they completely forget. Additionally, transients create disunity based on their own interpretations of situations. They don't see, they may look through the lens of Moses and not through the lens of God. Maybe Moses can't beat the giants, but God can. By the way, like he parted the Red Sea, you would think that they would remember that, right? Next, they grumble against God. Transients grumble against God. If you remember the story from Numbers 13 and 14, they do grumble against God, and it's not really Moses and Aaron so much that they're mad at. It's really the Almighty who led them there. Next, they resist the authority of the leaders God promised. So they rebel against God, and now they want a new leader. By the way, they wanted a new leader to take them back to slavery. We don't do that in our faith ever, do we? And lastly, transients would rather stick to what they know. They may be called, they may have consecrated themselves, but they're perfectly fine standing on the bank. Thank you. We'll just stay over here and we won't enter into what God promised for us over there. Transients say, seeing is believing. But God says, believe me and you will see. So thankfully, today's passage introduces us to another group who demonstrates what it looks like to trust God fully, do the seemingly impossible, and see the promises of God. I call this group the Traversers. Now, I need y'all to know that Traversers is a made-up word. My sister's in the audience. Our mother was an English teacher, and she would be appalled. Actually, she might be proud of me. But I was looking for a word of one who crosses, and the only one that I found was crosser, and that doesn't really go with transient. So we're going with Traverser, everybody. All right, so we're making up a word today, and it's going to work. So Traversers means those who cross. So let's see what God has for us today. So we're going to pick up in Joshua chapter 3, verses 7 through 13 initially. So the word says this: the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And as for you, command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. And Joshua said to the people of Israel, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, here is how you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you in the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man. And when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap. God bless the reading of his word. So this passage is saturated with some amazing details. It starts with God giving his endorsement of Joshua's leadership that he will make known to all of the people. He tells the priests that they will stand in the water as they bear his presence in the Ark of the Covenant. And Joshua tells them that their faith will become sight, and they will know that God will deliver them from the enemies on the other side. Like the last time they were in this position, they were also instructed to take 12, one from each tribe, for a certain task. And at this time, the task is unknown. But if you tune in next week, or if you want to read ahead in Joshua chapter 4, you'll know what their task is. But it sounds remarkably similar to what God asked them to do in Numbers chapter 13. So I have a question for you here. Is there a reason why God's making them do similar things that he had them do the time before? Would God ever do something like that with us? I'm reminded of poor Peter. Remember Peter when he was fishing all day and he didn't catch anything? And Jesus over there like, hey, Peter, catch anything? No. Throw your net on the other side. Okay. And he did, right? And because he did, you know that he caught an abundance of fish. God does those kind of things with us, doesn't he? So it starts with that. Last time they were in this position, they did all that. Okay, turn the page. The end of this particular passage concludes with an unlikely promise that God will stop the water from flowing when the priests step in the water. Like they have to step in the water first. Could he? Would he? Only one way to find out. So let's see what they do. Are they going to step in, or are they going to grumble and complain like last time? So we're going to pick up in Joshua chapter 3, verses 14 through 17. And the word says this. So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with their priests, bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the Ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the Ark were dipped in the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of the harvest. That's in parentheses, so we're supposed to pay attention to that. The waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away, at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. And those flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho. Now the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until the nation finished passing over the Jordan. All right, so the priest stepped into the water at flood stage. Now, why do you suppose God had them do it then? Was there not a more convenient or conducive time? When they did, the water stopped in a heap approximately 20 miles upriver. So this is important to note that Adam is approximately 20 miles from Jericho. So this is significant. So since this detail is included, there are a couple of ways of looking at this. One, if the water receded immediately, like as soon as their feet touched, that would mean that God would have had to have stopped it at least a half hour before. Because the water, by the way, flows at flood stage. I did a little research on this. I was kind of a nerd about it. It flows about 40 miles an hour at flood stage of the Jordan River. So that would mean that God knew they were going to step in, so he stopped at 20 miles before. They step in, it recedes, and wow, a miracle, right? Or two, the other way to look at it is when the priest stepped in, it might have taken at least a half hour for the water to clear out. Can you imagine what that would have been like if that was the case? So you step into 40 mile an hour running water and nothing happens initially. And then you start thinking, hey, is that going down? You think that's going down? I think that may be going down. And it might have taken a half hour for it to happen. But what's important to notice that whatever the situation was, nobody grumbled this time. It may have taken a minute, but they stood and waited. They waited for God to work. So lastly, The priest stood in the river the entire time while the people passed. Now, that's a lot of people. And God and the spiritual leaders literally stood in the gap to help the people get across to the promised land. And that's amazing. Many say seeing is believing. But God says, believe me, and you will see. Their faith allowed them to see. So this group of traversers did not fall into the trap that the transients fell into. There were still giants and fortified cities on the other side, and whether the water disappeared immediately or took a while to recede, they stood on the bank ready to cross, called and consecrated. The faith of the priest started the process, and the people followed on dry ground. The land they were promised was theirs. New homes, new food, and new promises to come. So how do we become traversers like this group about which we just read? What do traversers do? So I've got this on the screen for you. So if we want to be traversers, this is what it is to be crossers like them, those who cross. So here's what they did differently. They remember what God has done for them in the past and are encouraged by it. Think about yourself in that situation. Is that you? Can you think of all that God has done for you? Next, they take steps together in unity. So once again, they're asked to take a representative from each tribe to go in with the priest. And you'll find out the task later. But I think that there's something symbolic in all of that no tribe was more important than any of the others. And I just want to bring this to your attention. You know, we're all about to move over there. Some of us have been here since we were in the backyard. But some of you have only been here 2 weeks. But guess what? We're all in this together. We're going to make this move together. We're going to make this transition together. So we're going to take steps in unity. 3, follow God with reverence as he goes before them. So I want to remind you what Brandon preached last week about the ark being a half a mile ahead of them. There was a reverence, there was a respect. They wanted to be able to see the ark as they traveled. We're talking 2 million people. And there was that distance, and they followed with that reverence. It's something worthy to note, and it's something that we ought to emulate. Number 4, respect the leadership that God has appointed to help them get to where they are going. You are seeing 3 men being ordained this morning. There are people that God appoints and sets apart for leadership in his church. We should respect that leadership and cheer them on as they help us get us where we're going. And number 5, embrace changes that are to come because they know God is with them no matter what it takes to get there. So my question for you is, do you want to be a traverser? Do you want to be one who crosses? Do you want to be one who can step in the water when you don't know the outcome? So let's take a minute again to contrast this with the first group we reviewed that did not enter the promised land 40 years prior, the transients. So the transients, remember, forget what God has done for them in the past. They create disunity based on their own interpretation of situations, not through God's interpretation of those situations. They grumble against God. They resist the authority of leaders God has appointed, and they would rather stick to what they know. So now let's take a minute to be honest with yourself. Which one of these are you? Transient or traverser? So let's try on some of Jesus' teachings, and you can just try them on and see where you stand with each. Okay, y'all ready? All right, here we go. Seek first the kingdom of God. Transient or traverser? You can't serve God and money. Transient or traverser? Love and pray for your enemies. Transient or traverser? Turn the other cheek. Transient or traverser? Go the extra mile. Transient or traverser? Forgive others who have wronged you. Transient or traverser? Here's an easy one. Baptism. Transient or traverser? Jesus reminded us that one of the greatest mistakes we can make is to play it safe. So let's try this one. If you want to save your life, lose it. Transient or traverser? Transients say seeing is believing. Traversers say, if we believe God, we will see. Something worthy of mention regarding the Hebrews as they stood on the banks of the Jordan before they crossed is the fact that all of them lost family in the wilderness the last 40 years while they were wandering. So much of who they were and what they knew was still in that wilderness. And as the waters were opened, all of what they were was to be left behind for good. For some, that would be a great blessing. For others, that might be a great sadness. And that's the miracle of how God works, however. When he asks you to cross, he will close the river behind you and there's no going back. That's a choice we all make eventually. You may be still making that choice individually. And I pray that you cross so that you don't have to wander. As a church, we're making the choice to cross. And once we cross, there's no going back. Consider this teaching of Jesus to a man that asked if he could follow him. And Jesus said, yep, follow me. And the man said, well, I got to say bye to my family first. Jesus said in Luke chapter 9, verse 62, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. When you cross, there's no going back. So Real Life Ministries Texas is currently at the edge of our own proverbial Jordan River. So will you remember all that God has done in the past and take steps in unity with us and follow God in reverence as he goes before us, even though there's still giants and strongholds ahead? Will you respect the staff and elders as we stand in the gap to get everyone across and embrace the changes to come because God is the one who brought us here? Remember, if God will lead us to it, God will lead us through it. Imagine what is possible if you had the same faith in any personal Jordan crossing situation that God may have brought you. Maybe until today, you've chosen to be a transient in your faith, and you've been prone to wander. You don't have to have it all figured out. That's where faith comes in. Your transient faith can end today if you will just choose to step in the water. Today, you can become a traverser and cross into all the promises that God has for your life. So here's my call to action. We have a tradition where we do this at the end of our sermons where we actually ask our people to do something. So the call to action today is pretty simple. Here it is. Step in the water. Step in the water. Now that may mean a bunch of different things to each of you. For some of you, that may mean you need to join a small group. For some of you, that may mean you need to lead a small group. For some of you, that may mean you need to volunteer. Maybe that you are willing to sacrifice some of your time in our kids or students or any of our other hospitality ministries or whatever. Maybe for you, that means you give for the first time or you give more sacrificially. Maybe for you, it's literal and you step into the water and be baptized this morning. We've already had 5 today. We've got 2 more after this service. You won't be alone and we'll get you ready, okay? So maybe that's what it means to step in the water for you. But if you're still standing on the banks, I would encourage you just to take that next step into the water. And next call to action is continue praying about your commitment to the First Initiative. I can tell you that my lovely wife, Tamara, she's the lovely girl that plays the piano. She's amazing. We've been praying about this. And there's been a multitude of times in our lives that we've made some really reckless decisions based on our faith in the kingdom of God, and every single time it's worked out. And we're praying about what we're going to do for this initiative here, because when I think about what's going to happen over there, it's going to be a finite amount of time for me. I think about what's going to happen for the future. What is that going to mean for the community of Tomball? What's that going to mean for the state of Texas? What's that going to mean for the United States of America and ultimately the world? So I'd ask you to consider the same. Continue praying about your commitment. The staff and the elders will be doing our commitments next week. I believe you guys will be doing yours on May the 19th. So if the commitment cards are outside, if you go out this door, they'll be right out there, and Lisa will be there to intercept you. So be praying about that. So this is what I want to say in closing. Church, we can do this. We are called. We are consecrated. Now it is time to cross. Time for us all to be traversers. We are bound for the promised land. Who will come and go with us? However long you've been wandering, you can put your faith in him today. Many say that seeing is believing. I want y'all to hear this. But lifers say, believe God and we will see. And we will see. God bless you.